Okay, lesson number 3, but we are in lesson 6 in the book. You see I have here lesson 6A because I plan to continue lesson 6 next class. So we'll spend a couple of lessons on lesson 6. After that, we'll go into lessons 7 and 8 and probably do that in just one class. And then we'll start going into some geological things, fossils, and eventually Noah's flood. And you see all the rest of the schedule there. And don't forget the ultimate proof of creation that we'll plan to study for the last few classes. All right, we're going to defeat some neo-Darwinian dogmas. And a dogma is just a doctrine that is held, something that somebody believes firmly, like he is dogmatic about it. You probably know the adjective more than you know the noun. Okay, last time we were in here, we got to the end of the class, and I wanted to go over a passage. Turn your Bibles to Romans chapter 1. But I didn't quite have enough time to give it the full treatment, so I just decided that we would hold off on that. And so that's what I want to start the class with tonight. Romans chapter 1, beginning in verse 18. Now this passage tells us that it reiterates what Psalm 14:1 says, which is that the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. So whoever does not believe in God is reduced to foolishness. And this passage will tell us why. Romans chapter 1, beginning in verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Skip down to verse 25. Who exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. This passage tells us that unrighteous and ungodly men will suppress the truth in unrighteousness. But it also tells us that whatever may be known of God is manifest in them. Whatever can be known of God, God has shown it to them. That's interesting. God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, once again, as I mentioned before, it just kind of matter-of-factly states it. It doesn't go into a long, drawn-out argument of the point that God, like we are going into, a long, drawn-out apology for. If you know what the word apology means, it doesn't mean saying I'm sorry. It just means supporting your beliefs. For defending creation. But the Bible doesn't do that. It just states it as fact. God created. So, since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood. Well, that's interesting. His invisible attributes are clearly seen. Well, how can you see something that's invisible? But not only see it, but see it clearly. His invisible attributes are clearly seen. How is that true? Because they are understood by the things that are made. He's talking about his creation. And he said, by the creation, by the things that God made, you can see his invisible attributes, by the things that you can see. Well, what are God's invisible attributes? His eternal power and Godhead. That his eternity, his power to create, and all of the things that he exercises with his power and his godhood, or his deity, his godhead. Those things are clearly seen, even though they are invisible attributes, by the things that we can see, which is his creation, the things that he has made. So they are without excuse. These unrighteous and ungodly men who suppress the truth, they have no excuse. But God, I didn't know. My professor told me, my teacher told me that evolution was true and that there is no God, and that creation is just a myth. No, you are without excuse, because God has shown it to you through his creation. You believed a lie, if that's the case. And then it says, because although they knew God, they knew God. That tells us that everybody in his heart knows God. How is that? Because he has shown it to them. He has shown himself to us. So people say, well, no, I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist. Well, you might be an atheist, but if so, it's only because you have suppressed the truth in unrighteousness, because God has shown the truth to you, that he is the creator. Although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were they thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Talking about the difference between darkness and light in this class. Some people would rather have the darkness than the light. God has shown it to them, has shined the light of truth, but they have darkened their hearts. They have suppressed the truth, and they choose the darkness rather than the light. Who exchanged the truth of God for the lie. Once again, they choose the lie rather than the truth. On purpose. They exchanged it. They had the truth. God has shown it to them, but they exchanged it. They said, no, I'd rather have the lie. I'd rather have the darkness. They worshiped and served the creature rather than the creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. Powerful, powerful passage. And when you break it down and study it in more depth, you see why people call themselves atheists. How can a person suppress the truth? Why would a man suppress the truth? God has shown it to them. Why would they suppress that truth and reject it? Well, think about what happened after Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. In John 11, at the end of that chapter, John 11, beginning in verse 47, then the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, what shall we do? For this man works many signs. If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and nation. Then from that day on, they plotted to put him to death. He did miracles. He even raised a man from the dead, and it was indisputable. And they admitted it themselves here when said, this man works many signs. What are we going to do? If we let him alone, the Romans are going to come and take away our position of power, our place, and our nation. They would rather have the lie than the truth. They suppressed the truth because it would take away something that they wanted. And this is the condemnation that light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. And have no fellowship, this is how we're supposed to handle that, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come, or the difficult days come, and the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. That's what I'm trying to get into your minds and in your hearts right now, is to learn about your Creator so you can remember him now and act accordingly. Okay, so with that, we'll go on into irreducible complexity. I want to spend a little bit of time on this because it is a powerful argument for creation. What is irreducible complexity? Well, define irreducible complexity according to Michael Behe, and this is the book he wrote called Darwin's Black Box. I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a minute. But here's what irreducible complexity means. A single system composed of several well-matched interacting parts that contribute to the basic function, wherein the removal of any one of the parts causes the system effectively to cease functioning. An irreducibly complex system cannot be produced by slight successive modifications, which Darwin thought brought about evolution. Slight successive modifications. He says an irreducibly complex system cannot be produced by slight successive modifications because a complex system that is missing any part is by definition non-functional. In other words, as it's evolving into something that will function, it has no purpose. It's doing nothing until that last piece is added, and all of a sudden it's an eye, say, or whatever the part is. This is Michael Behe. He is an advocate of the intelligent design movement. Intelligent design, you would think, okay, they've rejected evolution and they understand that there is a creator, or that everything we see was intelligently designed. And there is a movement called IDM, or Intelligent Design Movement. And the people who advocate that know that evolution cannot be true. And they believe in some form of creation, but in general they do not believe in biblical creation as revealed in Genesis. Now when we talk in this class, when we're talking about creation, we're talking about Genesis creation, literal Genesis. If you don't believe in literal Genesis, I hope you will after this class is over, after this quarter is over, because that's what I am advocating, that's what I believe. The truth of God is revealed in Genesis and throughout the rest of the Bible, just as it's stated. For example, an automobile engine. How could you evolve an engine from parts? In other words, you start with a block, then you add, say, a rod, then a piston, then all of the parts until you get a functioning engine. At some point, it will begin to function. As soon as it begins to function, take one of those off, and what do you got? You got a non-functioning hunk of metal. So what purpose does it serve in the meantime? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about something that is evolving and adding parts to it with no purpose. It's not doing anything. It can't function until it adds that last part. And when it does, it's irreducibly complex. So that's the funny part about it, is, and we're going to talk about a lot of humorous things in this class. It serves no purpose in the meantime. It's just a blob that's just adding parts to it, and all of a sudden it is a functioning part of the body. So, tell you what, I'm going to skip on through this. Okay, remember when we talked about in the video the reptile to lung evolution? The reptile lung to bird lung evolution. And you have the bucket type or the pail type of lung, which is ours, or reptiles. And that somehow evolved into bird lungs, which is a throughput type of lung where air just keeps continually flowing through. How could that have evolved piece by piece, little by little? It could not. A mousetrap, a very simple machine. It consists of a hammer, the hold down bar, the spring, the platform, the catch. If you took away any one of those, this is a very simple way of explaining what irreducible complexity is. If you take away any one of those, it would serve no purpose. It would not function at all. Simple machine, but irreducibly complex. Each part must be the correct size, shape, and material. What if you had all the parts, but the bar is made of cardboard instead of steel? Well, you've got the bar, you've got all the pieces, but they've got to function. They've got to be the right size, shape, and material. What about the bar is the correct material, it's made of steel, but it's 2 feet long. Once again, it's got to be the right size, shape, and material. And it must operate in a suitable fashion. What if it is, you have all the parts, they're all the same size, but the spring is very weak? It's, once again, non-functioning. So irreducible complexity is just one of the many arguments in favor of creation. Something for which I don't think evolutionists have an adequate answer. All right, so I want to talk about the mechanisms of evolution. We'll talk about this hopefully in the next class also a little bit. So you answer this question. What were Darwin's methods of evolution? Evolution by what? Does that make sense? How did he say everything evolved? I know it's little by little, but what was the mechanism of Darwinian evolution? Anybody know? Natural selection. Okay, as opposed to artificial selection. We can artificially select in dog breeding to get the kind of breed that we want. But it happens in nature, and it's called natural selection. Nobody disputes that natural selection takes place. It certainly does, but within limits. So we're going to talk about that. But natural selection is variations within species that would give one individual an advantage over another in the struggle for survival. And that individual would be favored by natural selection. The favored races, they call it. And they talk about the struggle for survival. Evolutionists love death because they believe death is what springs evolution and brings it about. So in this struggle for survival, the fittest survive, survival of the fittest, and the weaker die off, and that helps evolution along. But then once they get bigger and stronger and faster and better, they pass along those new characteristics to the next generation. So survival of the fittest, bigger, better, faster, stronger, smarter. And one example in the early days of evolution was the neck of the giraffe. The food is up above in the trees, so he reaches his neck up, and this is when his neck was real short. And the longest neck giraffe is able to get more food than the shorter neck giraffe. So he passes his characteristics along to the next generation. And that one has longer neck than the last guy. And then the next one, his neck gets a little bit longer, until all of a sudden it's 6 feet long. So that was the original belief about how evolution took place. But also, Neo-Darwin, remember we're destroying some Neo-Darwinian dogmas? Well, one of them is mutation and natural selection in Neo-Darwinism. Mutation is a structural change in the genes. And in order to be a real mutation, it must be something new, not just a reworking of something that is already there. So mutation takes something that exists and it changes it, so it's something different now. And here's what one evolutionist, famous evolutionist, said about mutation. Ernst Mayr says, "It must not be forgotten that mutation is the ultimate source of all genetic variation found in natural populations, and the only new material available for natural selection to work on." So he said, natural selection, it has to have something to drive it, and that is mutation. That's all we've got. But we learned that our first difficulty is that all mutations seem to be in the nature of injuries that to some extent impair the fertility and viability of the affected organisms. How would you like to base your doctrine on something that the proponents of it admit that all mutations injure the organism that they occur in? They impair the viability, that is, the ability to live, of the affected organism. For any acceptable theory of the mechanism of evolution, a great number of fully viable hereditary variations is necessary. The mass evidence shows that all, or almost all, known mutations are unmistakably pathological. That is, dealing with disease or conditions that are abnormal or unhealthy. And the few remaining ones are highly suspect. So once again, all of them, or almost all at least, are unmistakably damaging, injurious to the organisms in which they occur. Creatures that defy evolution. Trumpet fanfare. Woo-hoo! It's exciting because we're looking at God's creatures and a certain aspect of his creation that defies any evolutionary explanation. I just love these, and I just want to impart them to you, show them to you. You remember when we looked at reptile lungs to bird lungs? That was a creature that defied evolution. And remember, these will just come at any time without warning, just pop up without any kind of notice, and they won't come in every class, so you never know when they're going to pop up. But this is another fun one that I think you'll get a kick out of. So creatures that defy evolution, we're talking about octopus. The octopus camouflage. Okay, chromatophores are just little sacs in the skin of a cephalopod or the octopus. Chromatophores just below the skin surface that contain pigment or coloring. And these little sacs, these chromatophores, can be stretched or retracted to change the brightness. And that's controlled by a complex series or complex network of nerves and muscles that control these sacs, that stretch them, let them go, so it changes the color. But it also changes the skin texture. Not just the color, but the skin texture by these finely controlled muscles and nerves. So they can create many different sizes and shapes, bumps, spikes, ridges, horns, etc., just to whatever shape they need to take on, and they're changing the color at the same time. So this combination of color differences can allow it to blend in with its environment. So, with that, Anna, I'm going to ask you to turn the light off, please. This is a picture showing an octopus using its camouflage ability. All right, so look for the octopus and watch what it does.
That an octopus would stand out very easily there if you couldn't use your camouflage, use your skin to change color and texture. Here's some algae in the foreground and an octopus. Isn't that amazing? Now Roger spooked him, so he took off, a cloud of ink, lands, and when he lands, the octopus says, "Look, I've been seen, best thing to do is get as big as I can get." That big brown makes his eye spot very big. So he's bluffing. Let's do it backwards. I thought he was joking when he first showed it to me. I thought it was all graphics. So here it is in reverse. Watch the skin color. Watch the skin texture. Just an amazing animal. Can change color and texture to match the surroundings. Watch him blend right into this algae. 1, 2, 3. And now he's gone, and so...
Isn't that amazing what God's creation has brought about? If you didn't know there was an octopus there, you couldn't find it. That is just one of the most amazing things in nature that God has created. The ability for that octopus not only to do that with its skin, but to look at that algae and know what color it needs and what spikes it needs and what bumps and all of that, and just immediately bring that change about on its skin and its body so it can blend right in. Let's see evolutionists explain that. So it's matching the pattern, the color, the brightness, and the texture of the algae. And it did it just like that, without even thinking about it. And it's an instinct, it's natural, and God created them that way to do that. How did this evolve, Mr. Evolutionist? Well, here's a couple of explanations for that. First of all, despite centuries of observations, however, we know little about how octopuses accomplished this unusual feat, Scientific American. We know little about it. But not to be daunted, this guy says, how did this evolve? Well, it's a fairly obvious extension of systems that are in place in many of their relatives. Chromatophores, remember the little sacs of color? They exist throughout the animal kingdom. It's not a particularly large step to evolve small amounts of control over them. And it's not hard to see how even a small level of control might give them an advantage in concealment. So in other words, it evolved because it increases the octopus's survival value. Remember, survival of the fittest? It gives him a competitive advantage in the struggle for life. But this says absolutely nothing about how it evolved. All that says is it just gives him an advantage, a competitive advantage. And here's how they answer many of the questions about how something evolves. Cephalopods have been living in Earth's oceans since the Carboniferous, at least 500 million years. That's a very, very long time in which a capacity can be refined. Consider time and chance and filtering effects. In other words, no evolution ever met a problem that a few million years couldn't fix. So how did this evolve, Mr. Evolutionist? 500 million years, that's how. End of discussion. Shut up. That's the end of the discussion. All I have to do is throw millions of years at you, and that covers everything. Octopuses and their relatives are equipped with a large brain that allows complex body patterns and behaviors thanks to millions of years of evolution. Once again, just throw millions of years out there, that answers everything according to them. Here's how it really happened. God said, "Let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures." That's how. "And let the birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens." So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded, according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind, and God saw that it was good. Genesis 1:20-21. Also in Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 6, "You alone are the Lord. You have made the heavens, the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth and all that is on it, the seas and all that is in them. You gave life to all of them, and the heavenly host bows down before you." That is how this happens. You, Lord, have made the heavens and the sea and all that is in them. Love those creatures that defy evolution. And that one's a really good one. Octopus Camouflage. Okay, let's talk a little bit about DNA. I'm sure y'all hear about it and study about it in school. Hardly watch TV without seeing something about DNA. Deoxyribonucleic acid. This is just an artist's rendering of what DNA looks like. We're not going to go into just a whole lot of detail about what it is, how it's made up, but this is the main thing I want you to know. The DNA is information. Information, the blueprint for an organism. That is the instruction for building and maintaining an organism, for it to function and grow and reproduce. All of that is included in the little DNA that you can't see without a microscope. And every individual's DNA is unique, just like a fingerprint. So if they go to a crime scene and the killer left behind some skin cells or blood or saliva or whatever, they can take that and find the DNA in it, and they know who their killer is. If they have that DNA his DNA in a bank, because nobody else in the world has ever had that same DNA, except perhaps identical twins. But DNA is unique to the individual. DNA can replicate or make copies of itself. It can be copied, corrupted, or lost, but no new information is ever gained in DNA. Okay, so we're talking about information. There is a study called information theory. Now, this doesn't have really anything to do with evolution. This has to do with information. There is a study of information theory. And this is one of the facts of information theory in the book by Dr. Werner Gett. He said, when its progress, that is information, when its progress along the chain of events is traced backward, every piece of information leads to a mental source, the mind of the sender. Okay, that's just one of the facts of information, that if you have any information, you can trace it back. Okay, I'm not at the source yet, and then I go and trace it back some more, and you continue tracing, and eventually you'll come back to the source, which is the mind of the one who sent it. Well, where did you get your DNA from? Don't say God. Where did you get your DNA from? Somebody say parents? Parents. You got your DNA from your parents. Where did your mom get her DNA from? Her parents. Where did they get it? Okay, so they continue. We're tracing that information back. Eventually, we'll come to Noah, right? But then we can trace it some more. And then eventually it'll get to Adam. So, well, what about beyond that? We can trace it even farther back than Adam. Now you can say God. God is the source of that information. No matter how far back you trace information, it's always going to come to the mind of the one who created it or sent it. This is, once again, here's one of those humorous statements by Naoyuki Takahata, who said, hypotheses, and we talked about a difference between a hypothesis and a theory, hypotheses about the origin of Homo sapiens, and that's the genus in which we supposedly are, the hypotheses about the origin of Homo sapiens, none of the hypotheses seems compatible with the observed DNA variation. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about observation. We're talking about experimentation in the lab and letting the results of the experiment lead us to the truth. But for the most part, when a scientist goes into the lab, he knows what he's going to find. He knows what he's supposed to find. And if he doesn't, well, he'll do the experiment again, trying to get to the results he's looking for. But here we're talking about observed variation of DNA. None of the hypotheses about how we evolved makes any sense. It does not fit with what we observe in the lab about DNA variation. All right, Takahata also said, even with DNA sequence data, we have no direct access to the processes of evolution. In other words, we don't know how it happened. Even with the DNA sequencing that we've done in the lab, we still can't figure out how it evolved. So therefore, objective reconstruction, objective meaning without us putting our own thoughts into it, just objectively reconstructing the vanished past, can be achieved only by creative imagination. And that sort of says it. That sort of says what goes on in the evolutionist experimentation and investigation in the lab. They know what the results are. They can't figure out how it happened, but we know what happened. Evolution happened. There's no God. I might not be able to tell you how it happened, but I know the results. I know the end result is there is no God. Even if I have to creatively imagine it and make it up, that's the results I'm going to come to in my experimentation. Remember this book, Evolution, A Theory in Crisis by Michael Denton? He has run into that. He just realized we can't explain evolution, don't know how it happened. We're going to have to go back to the drawing board and come up with plan B on how evolution actually took place, because we don't have answers. So, got a question for you. This is in your book. I believe it is. Do animals change over time? I see a nod. I see 3 nods. All right. The answer is yes. Very good. Animals do change over time, but within the limits placed in them by their creator. First bell. We got 5 minutes. The boundaries of the animal kinds. Remember, God said everything will reproduce after its kind. Now, you're going to hear that word about 118 more times, I believe it is, before this class is over. The word kind. Everything will reproduce after its kind. The boundaries of the animal kinds are absolute. You cannot go beyond those boundaries. There's variation within the kinds, but it will never go beyond the boundaries that God has put there for those kinds. Either by natural selection or artificial selection. We can try ourselves to bring about variety of animals, and we've done it with dogs. This is a prime example of variation within a kind. So you have dogs. Okay, I want a dog with long fur. All right, so I want a white. What I have now is brown, but I want a white dog with long fur, and I want it smaller because I want it to be an inside dog. So you keep breeding, and you come up with you're artificially selecting the breeds, and lo and behold, you come up with Snowball, our dog. And so you got a longer hair dog, curly hair, and it's cute. And we're going to talk a bit about this, I think in next class, about dog variation, how it comes about, and what it actually results in. But here's the important thing. Once you have all this variation, what do you have? What do you still have? All these dogs you've bred and bred, now what do you have? You still have, say the word dogs. Dogs. And they'll never get beyond the limits of that kind that God put them. So the question is, do dogs change over time? The answer is yes. What do they change into? Dogs. This is not what we would expect if evolution is true, but it is exactly what we would expect according to Scripture. According to the creation model, dogs are going to change. There's variation that God has put into animals just like us. I mean, there's variation. We got blonde hair, we got black hair, we got red hair, we got much variation in this room. We got tall, we got short, and much other variation. But we're all human, we're all people. There's variation just like there is in the dog kind. There's variation. They're not exact clones, but they're all within that kind. Genesis 1, the fruit tree yields fruit according to its kind. Verse 12, the herb that yields seed according to its kind. Verse 12, the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself, according to its kind. 21, great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, according to their kind. Every winged bird, according to its kind. 24, living creatures, according to its kind. Beasts of the earth, each according to its kind. 25, beasts of the earth, according to its kind. Cattle, according to its kind. Everything that creeps on the earth, according to its kind. God said it. He put the limits in it. He said, here's what I have done. Try as you might, you will not get animals to be able to reproduce outside their kind. Everything will reproduce according to its kind, according to God. And God saw that indeed it was very good. That's the truth. And I appreciate you coming tonight. Boy, we hit it right on the nose tonight. Be ready, if you haven't filled out the questions on lesson 6, please go ahead and do that. Continue studying that, and we will hopefully, Lord willing, conclude lesson 6 in the class that you'll see on the video over the weekend. As I said, possibly as early as tomorrow night, we'll see. But appreciate you coming, and we're going to dismiss